live streaming, YouTube, deadline, giving everybody a chance to get in here. Obviously, feels like, Doug, it's worth having the conversation. This will be the part where I'm technically only talking to you, but eventually some people will start to roll in, and it feel like
we might get a little off the cuff. We might get a little off the cuff here for a second while we set up.
I'm going to blast it out over on Twitter for the entire crew.
Yeah, that's what my first question I was going to ask you. We got like make sure we're set up on that. Make sure we're going live. We got Kosh Sneakers already in here. Yeah, so while you set that stuff up, I'll just kind of go through where we are with the trade deadline, hoping to have a couple folks on today. I think we think Keith McPherson over from WFAN is going to jump on. I think Lucas Kaplan over from Nets Daily is going to jump on. We'll see how that goes. And we are in people of the Harden hate already coming live into the stream here.
Wild. Here we go.
Yeah, so let's go. Let's look where we are right now. It's 1:00 Eastern. Things have definitely heated up along the sort of rumor mill, as it was probably to be expected. In terms, lots of people tweeting out today. Woj kind of pivots a little bit, going from late night, there's no traction, to a sort of like Harden wants out, but he's afraid to say it piece, which I found interesting. That Woj was essentially reporting, Harden wants out of the situation, but he doesn't want to formally ask sort of along the lines that he did in Houston, because it would be asking out of two situations in essentially a year. That's fine. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Yeah, no big deal. What's wrong with that? And so we're in a situation now where, we're 2 hours before the deadline. Typically, these things don't go. I mean, sometimes they can go right to the final minute, but that's in terms of submitting it to the legal office, and then it has to be approved and whatnot. But where we are now is nothing has happened. It seems like there's still sort of some media negotiation going on around, what each side wants. They can, basically make a Simmons for Harden swap 1-to-1, not quite 1-to-1, but they could get close enough without any real other meaningful pieces to be in there. And then so like what we're waiting on is probably just the two sides to agree on what the package is. That seems like there's enough. This is enough coming from enough different outlets: ESPN, The Athletic, Yahoo, and other places. Just Keith Pompey over at for the Inquirer, also on Locked On Sixers. Like, there's enough smoke here to say that there's plenty of fire. And so,
very smoky.
I have a lot of thoughts on this in terms, and by the way, we're reading this. This is real time. This is live. This could come in or not. We're going to have some other, like I said, we're going to have some other folks on. I'll jump off and do, at some point, do the Locked On sort of like national spot at
network
at
appearance.
2:00.
Got to get into that. Yeah. Network appearance for Doug,
Yeah, just like don't want to like big time everybody, but I'll big time everyone for a little bit and leave. But the
ultimate big time. Step away from it.
I'm gonna stop right there and leave. But what are your thoughts on where we are right now?
I think so, because we're going to get into some of the other smaller things that have happened around the NBA in general that are just, noteworthy stuff around this trade deadline. But specifically on this Nets and the Harden one, it does feel like, and you see this get thrown around a little bit, that from the Nets side and really from Philly, but this Thibault, Maxey, right, some of the younger players, that is probably what the Nets were angling for. Whereas Philadelphia is looking at it and saying, what about a Danny Green? What about a Seth Curry? And I wonder if now maybe you're at the point of this deal where it's just saying, okay, Seth Curry, Danny Green, like we can wrap our heads around what that would mean for our team and how we would construct that, along with Ben Simmons. Let me make that clear. Simmons as well. And then also saying now assets, now draft pick wise, and maybe Philadelphia is more willing to part with draft capital as far as what it would mean for them on the back end, and having Harden and Embiid and still keeping Maxey and these other players that could be key for them this season, and being willing to forego some assets down the road. Likewise for the Nets, they maybe can take veteran experience and plug it into their team. And might be just as well to say, and we wouldn't mind having another couple picks. We said this on the podcast yesterday, or today's episode. Picks can turn into another move you can make at the deadline. The hard part is, the closer we get here, is the more difficult it may become for Sean Marks to say, okay, I've completed this. Now I can turn my attention to other options. And that isn't the worst case scenario. Obviously, this is the most important domino to fall, but you are getting tight in those windows. And I wonder if Sean Marks is doing any legwork on the back end of When this happens, then you'll see another couple of subsequential moves for Brooklyn.
Well, see, that's actually, so there's a couple problems here. One is this, obviously, if it's happening, if we think it's happening in earnest, which Woj, by the way, is just still said that he thinks it's if, not when. Like he still seems very much on the side of it's not going to happen. That's sure. We know that Woj is just a little bit more of a mouthpiece probably for the front office than some other spots, in the Nets front office at least, than some other spots. But the problem with the waiting is, when you're involved in a deal this big, you end up having to forego some of these smaller deals along the way because they are kind of important for putting together a bigger package. This is probably the case for both teams right now, is that like the bigger trades tend to take more to sort of pull off, and you need to have all of your powder dry. But to do that, you really can't engage in some of these other smaller deals, which have already happened. Like, the Serge Ibaka's deal, Goran Dragic. Not to say the Nets would have been in play for any of these guys, but there's like, Dante DiVincenzo's already traded, Rodney Hood, Semi Ojeleye. There's a lot of like rotational pieces that have already been swapped around over even just this morning and early afternoon. And you really can't, as a team, put yourself in the place to start to make those deals happen when you are already sort of asset devoid anyway, which the Nets are. Like, they do not have a lot and like to put together a lot of meaningful piece trades. And so in that sense, sometimes the trade deadline can just come and go because you weren't able to put the one big thing together. And because you weren't able to do that, you really weren't able to get on those smaller things as well. Again, the Nets would not have been involved in a lot of these smaller deals anyway. That's just not the nature of the way their roster is built right now and their asset collection is built. So I'm not really seeing a lot of stuff that's happened here and been like, ooh, just missed. Like there was a massive overpay for Serge Ibaka already, stuff like this. But I do think that we could see, with the clock ticking here, that they just get down to the deadline and it's just kind of over. And I think that Nets fans probably need to prepare themselves for at least that possibility.
And you mentioned anything that's happened right now so far, you wouldn't say, oh, maybe the Nets were going to be involved in him. But do you think that there would have, if not for this opportunity, let's say Harden wasn't going anywhere, what would the deadline have looked like for the Brooklyn Nets, right? Because fans are talking about, what about the TPEs? We've kind of said before, remember, you can wait on that. They don't expire. You can go into the offseason and still utilize them. And then whether it's moving Paul Millsap or thinking about what other teams may be looking at on this roster, do you think that the Nets would have been active in a obviously very different way around the deadline? Because my consensus is, just from the injury standpoint alone, Brooklyn would have said, how do we get a couple extra healthy bodies in here to stem this month-long tide maybe before everyone's back and healthy? Because we know how close they are with this tumble of a 9-game losing streak to really falling into a dangerous territory. And maybe it would have been worth it to pull in a couple pieces to say, at least it'll get us 2 or 3 more wins over the next 10 to 12 games, which is somewhat crucial at this point.
Well, so look at the deal that went down with Milwaukee, who is obviously in on this and in a win now sort of mode. And what they sent out, they had to send out to bring Serge Ibaka back in the door. And even whatever you think about Ibaka at this point, they sent out Dante DiVincenzo, they sent out Rodney Hood, they sent out Semi Ojeleye, and they got Ibaka back. Like the Nets, and there's no realistic world where the Nets are putting together that kind of package to bring back Serge Ibaka, who we only recently talked about as maybe being a buyout guy, right? So, there's no way they missed out on that situation. I wouldn't say, because I don't think based on that package that the Bucks sent that they were, and that was ended up being a 4-team deal altogether. But I don't think based on the package that the Bucks sent out with that there's a world where the Nets could have gotten in on that. Marvin Bagley went to the Pistons, and Trey Lyles and Josh Jackson went back to the Kings along with DiVincenzo. So, I just don't think you can look at some of these other deals, like the Goran Dragic, Thad Young swap. Both of those guys have been talked about being buyout guys. So, when we're talking about and by the way, Dragic might still be, Thad Young might still be, but when we're talking about what the Nets could have they gotten on these deals, no, we'd already talked about these guys as buyout guys. Right. Like they don't have the stuff to put together in a meaningful way. They're not sending Dante DiVincenzo out, solid contract coming up, where you'll have his bird rights, all this other stuff. And so I think that, and I don't want Nets folks to start overrating the pieces that they do have. I don't really believe there was a scenario where they could have put that package together. Okay, so let's move back into Harden. Let's just read some tea leaves on this stuff real quick. So we get the Woj piece that comes out, that says, he wants out but doesn't want to ask. Other little stuff, if you really want to look into it. good job by Brandon over on Twitter, but he kind of retweeted this piece today about the Sixers. Would they cancel practice today? Which I thought was funny, where Doc was like, hey, Doc Rivers like, hey, we don't want to get everyone involved in this situation. So we're cancel practice today for those that are left,
Practice canceled. 4 players didn't show up. The other 11.
So we'll see you guys tomorrow. Some of you, maybe not.
Now, if you're handed a gift bag on the way out of the facility, take that as a sign. Take that as
Seth,
a sign.
we're gonna need you to leave your playbook, pal. But anyway, so I think that there's a situation where you could read into that a little bit. I think it's probably a smart organizational move to probably there is so much floating around here that why subject everyone to kind of standing around and waiting if they thought there was actually something that was going to happen at 3 p.m. You'll just know, they're following it, I'm sure, much like other people are, because it's part of their career. But you can look at that one and be like, okay, maybe this is sort of imminent. And you can look at the Woj piece, Adrian Wojnarowski piece, as saying, this is just another piece of negotiation, that's saying we don't have to do this. At least our guy plays. Our guy plays for the team. Whatever you think about his play right now, and he sat out a bunch of games, he still has taken the court this season in a Nets uniform. And at times performed very, very on a very, very high level. And Nets still have that over anything else. That they have a guy. Simmons has not reported. He's not going to report. He has already said, I am good not reporting. He's foregone millions and millions and millions of dollars. And Ben, at least from what we can tell, fine with it so far. And so I just don't that is still, and they still, and for whatever you think, Harden's still the better player right now. Right now, he's still the better player. And that is still it looks like, okay, so Shams just tweeted, they just finalized the trade. So as we're speaking right now, I'm going to read it. Shams Charania from The Athletic, the Brooklyn Nets and Philadelphia 76ers are finalizing a trade, sending James Harden for Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, and draft picks. So there you go. We don't need to speculate anymore. An absolute bomb. Shams has been laying in the weeds, has barely tweeted over the last 24 hours. And let's just have everyone take a deep breath and think about what this means. I'm going to jump on with the Lockdown guys probably sooner than later. Yep. And I'm going to end up probably having to record a spot here. Might have to have Adam take you for a few minutes as we do this live. Hey, this is the thing about doing a live show, that sometimes the live stuff is going to happen. Dude, look at these hands. Steady right now. Steady.
It's I can't even be phased right now.
You want to can I give a quick reaction to this?
Well, yeah, I'll go ahead, because you're going to get
okay. Yeah, so I am glad this happened because, at this point, it would have felt nuts to not have it happen, right? And I kind of was, emotionally hedging off the idea that I was more emotionally hedging on the idea that Harden was going to come back and be like, hey, we need to prepare for the rest of the season of talking about Harden and dealing whatever the situation is. Where in my mind, and Adam and I talked about this off the air yesterday, was that both of us agreed, but God, this has to happen, if for nothing else, but just from the optics. They have to, make this deal happen, because the next, just from a content standpoint, I think the next few months were going to be absolutely brutal. At least now there's this glimmer of sort of transitional hope.
Of course.
But there's lots of other questions to answer right now, but in terms of just how this probably situation needed to play out, it probably really couldn't go any other way from this, except for this. And I think that, me personally have been preparing to just say, okay, if it doesn't happen, how do we go about the rest of the season talking about this? Because it's just going to be a cloud that hangs over it the rest of the time.
Of course. Yeah, no. And listen, you said we batted it around. I had gotten to a place where I wanted it to happen. I laid it out on today's episode around avoiding this off-season issue and prolonging what could have been this process. And then while Ben Simmons has been away from Philadelphia, so it feels like, yeah, it's a big problem, but it's not a problem we're actively dealing with. The Harden situation was something you had to actively deal with if you were the Brooklyn Nets. You can get down the line here about, the value of the package you get back. We'll see what the picks ultimately end up being. But it felt like you needed to do something here, and really for both sides, from a Philadelphia standpoint, wanting to have your biggest push opportunity for a championship this year, and from the Nets perspective, just knowing that if not now, when? And if later, much harder. And that's why it felt like it was worth to do it. And we'll get into here, as you'll probably have to hop out in a second. We'll get into kind of what it means with Seth Curry and Ben Simmons being what comes back, expectations around when Ben Simmons can get on the court, and then what it's going to look like for this team now. How does the roster shift and reconstruct around these two pieces? There's some really good things when you think about, obviously, Ben Simmons and his defensive ability, and then Seth Curry. The thing that we talked about all year and what the Nets have lacked in the absence of Joe Harris is that Herculean lift for Patty Mills. Well, guess what? You're adding another guy that knows how to shoot from the perimeter and a key skill set that the Brooklyn Nets 100% know how to use effectively around what'll be now, well, a new big three, I guess. We include Simmons in that. Kevin Durant, Ben Simmons, and Kyrie Irving. This is the big three that we all knew we were getting 2 years ago.
Let me add a couple of other pieces that just came through. Paul Millsap was included in this trade.
Nice.
And then I think you mentioned it, but just to reiterate that the Nets are going to recoup at least a few draft picks. It says multiple draft picks, so we'll see where we get to.
Not insignificant.
Oh, and I never include that Andre Drummond was coming to the Nets in this deal also. And so,
by the way, so not an insignificant piece, because that was speculated around a little bit of, what would the Nets maybe think about? How could this possibly work? And bringing back a guy like Andre Drummond, who we remember the Nets, a lot of fans wanted him at a certain point. You go, listen, don't overvalue what this guy is, but specifically to what the Nets could use in their lineup and on their roster, a guy that'll gobble up some rebounds for you. Yeah, he's a big body. And I think we've kind of seen in even the, whatever you want to say, rookie Day'Ron Sharpe, right? Just being a more physical, bigger player has helped the Nets in those instances. And Andre Drummond obviously is a veteran, has experience, and has value. So that doesn't hurt to bring a piece like that back over in this trade.
So let me just recap the trade. Let me recap the trade real quick. Cause look, we're getting to the stuff in real time here. And sometimes little pieces are added to it. So ultimately, this is what the trade looks like right now. It's James Harden and Paul Millsap for Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and multiple draft picks. It's really interesting because it's funny. If you go back, I'm going to end up probably talking some of this in the Locked On show. Go back a year. I feel like I'm the Joker during his scene where he's talking to the mob. Like, go back a year, and this is what happened. But if you go back a year, look at before Ben Simmons implodes in the playoffs, before James Harden's on the table, right? Before all this happened. And if you look at what the Nets sent out, they sent out Karis LeVert and Jared Allen and Taurean Prince and a bunch of picks, and they got back James Harden. Essentially, that deal turned into Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and other draft picks, right? And it's so funny because by the transitive property, if you take Harden out of the deal, that is essentially what happened here with these with these two deals. And I think if you looked at the time with that deal, I think it would have been polarizing, but it probably would have seemed fair. Now, look, everyone's status has now changed over the last year. When we did that for Harden, it was like, oh my God, an absolute steal, right? It's like, if you didn't vote 10 times out of 10 for that, I don't know what to tell you. Now, then we go through a bunch of things. Harden gets hurt. Simmons implodes in the playoffs. Doc Rivers says all the wrong things in the post-game press conference, right? Like, he sits out. Harden comes back in. He still might be kind of hurt. He's a little bit out of shape. And now all of a sudden, like, the whole narrative has changed. But if you just look back at what the original package that went out to what came back in, I'd have to say you think it's fair. Getting Seth Curry in this deal was critical. Absolutely critical for the Nets. They had to bring back in shooting. They had to bring back in we did a little switcheroo. We had to bring back in an effective shooter without Harris. It could not just be Patty Mills living around the perimeter, on catch and shoot threes. Seth Curry's elite at that. He will immediately help their spacing around the perimeter. To get him back, like I said, was absolutely critical for what the Nets need on the current roster. This will help, assuming how much of a ramp up time Simmons needs. This will help in the short term in just winning basketball games, which had been a struggle here, obviously, for the Nets, 9 in a row. I can see just like the general feeling around Nets world that when I did my one quick tour around Twitter was that Nets fans seem to be fans of this. I think after the reporting this morning that came out about Harden, that we were in a situation where it was going to probably be hard for him to walk back in the door, like we talked about at the top. And I read an interesting thing this morning. Nate Duncan from Hollinger and Duncan, one of the best basketball podcasts there is. He had an interesting quote about James Harden doesn't have an agent, and which is fine. Like, you save your 10% and move on. But the where that hurts you is around media messaging, because your agent usually carries the water through the media for you. And Harden not having an agent, it's like a situation where he's not able to control some of the narrative if he's not going to speak, because a lot of times, a lot of, NBA folks are, a lot of NBA reporters are getting their information from front offices and from agents as well. When you don't have an agent to control the message for you, you have a chance to have something like this happen. Like, you don't get, there's no rebuttal for you. Like, I'm sure if he has an agent, there's a rebuttal. Like, whatever it is, make anything up. They weren't giving him the resources. Like, he's been trying to rehab this thing and it's not working. Make anything up. I'm making these things up. When you don't have someone to do that for you and you try to do it yourself, sometimes it can come off whiny. I know why players don't want to do it. It's smart not to do it. It's smart not to go one-to-one on stuff like that. It's smart to talk through proxies. And Harden not having that I probably did at least a little bit hurt the narrative.
And we are back. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo! Sorry, continue.
We were not live the whole time?
No, we were live the entire time. Everyone loved all of your insights. I just could not hear you while you were talking.
Oh, so God.
Everybody heard what you were
My heart
taking
sunk.
in.
I said so many amazing things during that time.
No, you're good. Everything you said was brilliant, I'm sure, but I had to do it. Listen, in the old live bag, I was just doing, go ahead, Doug. Yep. Love what you're bringing to the table here. Let me reset. Do you need to hop out and go get ready for
I'll do another 5 till Keith. I'll do another 5 till Keith comes in here. And so if he's still on tap to come in, love all the comments. Would love to respond to everyone that's commenting here. YouTube live stream, much appreciated. Everyone jumping in. This exciting day. I mean, look, when things are happening, like when things happen, it can be exciting. I think that we were, if you judge by just the general tone of like where this thing has gone, it's very interesting around this, because I think this is a situation where if you thought that people and players needed a scenery change, like the players probably get what they want to here. And I think a little bit of Harden was probably self-created around this. And so, although I can make a case that Simmons was self-created too, because he could have reported, like, there's a part where you can kind of suck it up and go play. I get that they handled it all wrong after that series, but
can I speak to it in that sense around this entire trade piece in general, and even going back to Harden's time in Houston? You hear this narrative about Dame Lillard and why he should want to get out of Portland because it hasn't been working out, or Bradley Beal, and then you look at LeBron James and going from Cleveland to Miami, right back to Cleveland, out to LA. In the instances when it works successfully, whatever the move is that you force, or however you try to form your own super team or get to a new location, when it works, it feels like the change of scenery piece is exactly what everyone's been waiting for. And how good did it work out for everyone involved? When it doesn't go well, and obviously this is going to be one of those instances, then all of a sudden it's about, well, that's a disgruntled player. He didn't want to be a part of it. He didn't want to fight through the bad times. Like I don't have a conviction on what's the right or wrong answer here, right? Like, how long is too long? Now, in this particular instance, Harden losing some of his steam around being a Brooklyn Net feels like too soon. But, if Dame Lillard came out tomorrow and said, hey, I'm all set here, or Bradley Beal, right? Or when LeBron first left Cleveland, you went, yeah, I get it, right? Like the time has come here. So I think sometimes the amount of time you're willing to stick something out matters. And in both cases, James Harden right now for Brooklyn, or for the 76ers now, and Ben Simmons coming to the Nets. Like, I think Ben Simmons probably pushed it a little bit too soon, taking issue with what was happening there, how he was being treated, how he was being talked about. And I wonder, although he's been in the league for a handful of seasons here, if because of how quickly it got fractured, it got to this point, right? Well, there's nothing we can do here. Morey put his foot in the ground. You can sit and take your paychecks. We're not going to play you. We're not going to welcome you back. We're going to wait to make a trade. It's interesting, the personal narratives that I think players and people build up around any issue they're having, until ultimately you get to a place where there is a point of no return. Clearly, Simmons has been there for a while, and Harden apparently got there in a very short amount of time with Brooklyn this season.
The Nets traded James Harden. I just sat and thought about that for a second. I cannot believe it's February 10th and the Nets just traded James Harden. Like, if you heard this happen,
what are the odds updates? What are the odds updates? Because I do want you on this. I'm sure it hasn't happened. What are the odds updates on championship odds? Where has Philly gone to? Where have the Nets gone to?
Yeah, let me look real quick.
While you pull those up,
I tweeted that out this morning, and I And actually, it was funny because the Sixers their odds had moved up, and just real quick, the Nets are going to get the Sixers 2020 first round. That can't be right because it's past that. First round unprotected pick, but that would mean they got a pick from the past. So I think there's going to be a correction on Woj's tweet here. And they can defer until the 2023. He probably just means this year. They're going to get this year's draft pick, is my guess. So I'm going to go find this really fast while I muddle around talking, and then I'm going to.
I'll go ahead and definitely am going to
jump out.
Out here. Yeah,
looks like our good friends over at BetOnline don't have it up yet.
Must have been too intense. They had to take it down for a second
and
recalibrate.
They probably there's some chance where they've all taken this down.
But yeah, Cash Sneakers over here in the chat, obviously a little bit of
okay. Yeah, this is an unreported one. I'm not gonna say where this is from, but I found it somewhere else. Because our BetOnline's are a good friend. It's plus 420. Nets, so the Nets dropped from plus 350 to plus 420. Okay. Sixers went from basically doubled their chances with this, from plus 1100 to plus 550. Second best odds in the East. So
last thing before you get out of here, then I'll start to rotate through some other guys. But do you, in this short term, do you think that the Nets can get this thing sorted out, organized, and put into a point where you go, hey, we're still on track to compete for a championship this year. That's still where we're at here. It's going to look different.
Okay, so yeah. So real quick, around that, there's no chance the Nets do this without having significant assurances, probably from back channels, that Ben Simmons is all in on coming back right away. Yes. There's no way. That's not going to be reported because that would be tampering. But the part where there's just no chance to cross your fingers, hope he comes. No, there's no way. Right. They have had
they would not bail on this season, right? They would not give up on this season.
No way. You would never do it. You wouldn't do it short of as close to. And at this point, by the way, sometimes teams can. It's not tampering. So one other thing about tampering is it's not tampering when a team allows the other person and agent to talk to the team. They can do that. That's allowed. That happened with Harden back in Houston. They said Houston was hey, it's okay for other teams to talk to our guy here. Once the team allows it, it's no longer tampering. And so if you're engaged in a talk, the teams will say, yes, it's okay. Contact these guys and have a conversation or through the representation and do it. It's only tampering when the team doesn't allow it. That's when it's hey, that's when they say, hey, we didn't say you could say anything to our guy. You can't come in here and talk. When they allow it, it's okay. So I'm sure that there was assurances, many, many, many assurances that were hey, I'm in shape. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to play. I'm here. For now, I'm here for the duration of my contract, which is still got a lot of years on it, Ben Simmons. So, all right, I'm going to jump out of here. So hopefully Keith comes in here, Lucas Kaplan later, and I'll try to jump back in. Excuse me, after I'm done with lockdown.
God, he's a professional. There goes Doug Norrie, the man, the myth, the legend. We'll let you know, by the way, that you can find him over on DFSR, Daily Fantasy Sports Rankings, all those projections, right? DraftKings, FanDuel, all that kind of good stuff. But in the meantime here, as we wait, it could be Keith McPherson, obviously from WFAN, KM till AM, doing the late shift there over on local New York sports radio, if you're familiar to the area. He's also Talking Nets host. Listen, he's been around this team and been around these conversations a lot. Lucas Kaplan is also going to be coming in here, and we're trying to tap into Nets Kingdom as well with Saint. If you're a Brooklyn Nets fan, you're going to look obviously at Nets Kingdom as being kind of that outlet. They've been doing a great job over on Twitter Spaces, really dialing up the conversations leading up to this, some of the difficulties around the performances from James Harden before he ultimately sat out there with the hamstring injury, etc. So we're just going to kind of organize some of our thoughts here collectively. We'll reset the table on what is going on with the trade. And then in the absence of our next guest and with Doug gone here, I'm going to tap into the chat. So if there's specific kind of questions or commentary around this, I'll start to assert, hey, how are we feeling about this trade and the package that we got back? We'll go back over it. You can see it there. Harden and Millsap for Simmons, Curry, Drummond, as well as picks. Looks like multiple picks. And as Doug alluded, could be the first-round pick in the upcoming draft, and then maybe another one and a possible two. We'll see what it looks like. Those aren't insignificant things, though it does feel very much secondary relative to where the Brooklyn Nets stand right now. The last piece that Doug mentioned there, we started to talk about championship odds. I think that the next step that we're going to take here is, how do we look at the Brooklyn Nets roster and think about where these players will plug in and how the rotations are going to look significantly different. The really big piece, obviously being Ben Simmons, and he's going to come back in. He's going to be ready to play immediately. Okay, fine. And probably some level of ramping up on the court, we'll say. The other really big piece is Seth Curry, right? Because there were a few swirling rumors that the Brooklyn Nets were in these conversations, and whether it was fan driven or, speculation, how much of these things have traction, where was it going to involve maybe Patty Mills, because that would increase what Philadelphia felt like they could do in the short term pursuing a title. When you now look over the roster and add in Seth Curry, you've replaced, if not at the exact same level or the exact same position, the production from beyond the arc that you've lost all season long, 14 games in, with Joe Harris. You've completely now changed the amount of shooting that you're going to surround Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving with when they come back. So the new look now, even though they're dealing with a whole other slew of injuries, from Nicholas Claxton to LaMarcus Aldridge to all these other veteran players, you have to look at it and say, put Seth Curry in the backcourt alongside Kyrie Irving. Okay, that's your backcourt now. Now you also have Kevin Durant up there in the front court. You want to start Claxton at center. That's fine. You want a version where the matchup's right and you're putting in LMA. Okay, great. And now the other piece is, let's say that Kessler Edwards stays in the starting rotation for the Brooklyn Nets. He can shoot from the outside. He also is a substantial defender. Now we're waiting for the Ben Simmons component. Is Ben Simmons going to go into that pseudo 5 role, something that he didn't want to play in his time with Philadelphia? Is he going to plug into the 3 role? It's relatively positionless basketball, as we've said all along. So the combination of any 5 players. No, exactly. And by the way, let's pivot over here a little bit while we wait for our next. It could be Keith, could be Lucas. I'm not sure who will come in first here. But over on Twitter, this comes in from Guillermo, man. We've seen Guillermo a lot in there. But Ben doesn't even need to shoot. That's a fact, right? If you think about a 5-man lineup and you have any version of Seth Curry, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, Ben Simmons, and name player X, do you want to, put a player like Kessler Edwards still in that starting lineup? And he has defensive capabilities. Is Nick Claxton going to be on the floor in some of these versions because of his switchability defensively? One of the things, I don't know if we talked about it on the podcast or not. And also, we're also leaving out Drummond in this equation, by the way. We're staying kind of high level. But one of the things I brought up, I don't know if on the podcast or just in passing conversation, was think about the defensive versatility that you're now going to get on the court when you choose to utilize Nicholas Claxton. And we've talked about how Kevin Durant, when you have your 2 biggest players are going to be Kevin Durant and Nicholas Claxton, the rotation and switchability for Claxton is fantastic. If you add Ben Simmons into this mix, you now tell Kevin Durant, take the 3rd most dangerous option on the defensive end. And because of the length of Ben Simmons, the length of a Nicholas Claxton, the length of a Kevin Durant could be picking up the 2, the 3, and just using his incredible length to defend against it. So it really gives a completely different look, as we know, much more heavily defensive based, but it makes them a far more dangerous team, I think. And by the way, it also updates, and I'm kind of doing a little bit of a scan between YouTube comments. I'm over on Twitter a little bit. I'm getting some commentary back from Doug as well. So I'm in the blender here a little bit with all of this. But think about the fact that, go back to last year's playoffs even. We know it's a toe on the line. They could have taken down Milwaukee, probably would have if healthy, but it's the ifs and buts of that scenario. But think about the idea. Here we go. It's all coming together now. Think about the idea of having a setup now where you're a dangerous defensive team as much as you are a team with a lot of talented offensive weapons. So that's obviously incredible. Let's do this in 2 phases. First, Doug Norrie gets right back in on it because he didn't take long to handle that. And then also, this is who we really, sorry, Doug, not to shrink you here. But when you get Keith McPherson in the door, that is what you're looking for, man. We're in the blender, Keith, but it seems like the perfect timing because the deal actually does go down. So having you in gives us something to really talk about as opposed to saying, what do you think's going to happen? Deal confirmed. We're talking about James Harden and Paul Millsap going over for Simmons, Seth Curry, and Andre Drummond, plus picks in some form or fashion. There you go. That's what I thought it was going to be. What was Keith's instant reaction when the deal went down?
We got more than I thought we were going to get. We finessed the process. We got more than I actually even like really thinking about it over the last couple days. I didn't think they were going to go this far. Daryl Morey is Sports Person of the Year. I thank him for cooperating. Like, this made me feel good about Karras and Jared Allen playing together. This made me feel like so much optimism for the rest of the season. I already came out like parade back on. We just got better. I don't care if any of these nerds on Twitter want to say Brooklyn lost the trade. They don't watch basketball. They're stands. They're just crying about James Harden or Ben Simmons. Look at what we got back for a guy that clearly didn't want to be here. A guy that we gave up our future stars for, and they're flourishing elsewhere. We had to get a good return on this, and we got it done in Marks We Trust. I am elated.
Where did you stand? Because I was just starting to get into this here. And by the way, if you don't know Keith McPherson, I mean, you got to be underneath a rock somewhere. But obviously, KM till AM, he's over on WFAM. He's doing the 7 to midnight shift all during the week. He's talking Nets at Keith McPherson over on Twitter. Obviously, give him a follow. There it is. Look at that. He's even got the proper identification just to make sure it's real. Where do we stand? Because I was just starting to get into it's like, now what is the shift? I was just saying, This arguably makes the Nets a far more balanced team on both ends of the floor now. You bring in Seth Curry, so you still bring in the perimeter shooting. And now when you think about whether it is Ben Simmons with Claxton on the floor, you want to bring in Drummond for the rebounding piece. But Doug, I couldn't remember if I had said this on the podcast or not, that when you think about defensive assignments in a scenario where you have Ben Simmons, Nicholas Claxton, and Kevin Durant on the floor together, suddenly Kevin Durant can pick up a 2 or a 3 and just be like, yeah, I got length. What's up? And the other 2 guys can do all of the switching versatility on whatever assignment you think is the most dangerous on a night in, night out basis. Does this change your perspective about what this team is when it comes to playoffs and needing some of those big stops that, even going back to last year, as close as it could have, should have been against the Bucks? This makes them a better team on the defensive end of the floor, first and foremost.
Well, yeah, Keith could probably respond to this too, because like it's so funny. Like, usually with this kind of situation, you never get this. Can't even do the jersey over the face. With this kind of situation, it's rare to see like superstar level archetypes trade spots for championship level teams, right? Because like Harden and Simmons are just 2 completely different players that your overall teams just shift overnight, and that's why. Like, do you agree with that? Like, it's like this unprecedented to have. Like, James Harden could not be more different than Ben Simmons. Like, they do totally different things and on the basketball court, and yet they're kind of what each team needs right now. And so you have to like totally re-envision what the Nets are as a team, right?
I'm glad you're talking about fit and not personality, because a lot of the conversation has been around personality and these guys being divas and quitting on the team and pouting, whatever. Like, that is what they do in the narrative basketball association. That's the drama of it. That is where the storylines come from. I held up my jersey because Kevin Durant is on this team. Kevin Durant almost beat the Bucks by himself last year. You put all of these guys around him, what do they think is going to happen this year? We're in a much better spot. And when we talk about fit, let's hope that Ben Simmons is fit and is in shape and worked on his free throws and worked on a mid-range jumper. You don't got to give me a 3. Just have some way to pull it. And then when you add Seth Curry, come on, bro. Think about this. Kyrie Irving being full-time can still happen. Joe Harris coming back can still happen. There are moves today that can still happen. In Marks We Trust, they are not done. We finessed the process. The Sixers, like Joel Embiid, just put out the like RIP Bozos like meme. What an idiot. Joel, you're going to get hurt sometime in the rest of the season, and then Harden is going to have to carry the Sixers without you, and you're going to be in the same predicament. So the Nets got better, and I love that now it's all coming out that like KD had already talked to Ben. This had been in the works for a little while now. I think, you know what, like, I love how the Nets do their like leaks and how they approach things with the media.
Yeah,
well,
this is funny
like,
because like we watched water carried all over the place by Woj over the last couple days specifically. Like, it was very obvious. I joked,
right? The talks had stopped.
And well, and we talked about that being a leveraging technique. I joked about it last night a little bit, and we talked about it today. It's like it's sort of all still very obvious where that's coming from. It's like, hey, we're not gonna talk about this until you include Seth Curry, and you got to include picks, and we're just not doing it because we don't have to. And like that's all very, very well timed. And Keith held up the Durant jersey too, and it's really important to understand something. Like, this is not for Keith. This is for like everybody else. Like understand that when you have Kevin Durant on your team, you can bring, I called it archetypes before, right? Like you can bring on lots of different kinds of players because those players fit with a guy who's fits with everybody else. Like Kevin Durant can play with anybody on the court. He can play with primary ball creators. He can play with guys who need to stand off ball. He can play with defensive first guys. He can play with offensive first guys. Because he's everything. Like, because he's everything, he can be like we saw in the Bucks series, the guy that just dribbles up the ball of the court and just yells at everyone, "I'm just going to shoot on this possession." Like, and that was the offense. It was like the offense was Kevin Durant shooting. And when you have that kind of guy, and Joel Embiid's great, and he's going to be in line for the MVP this season, although actually his odds will probably drop a little bit now with Harden. The Embiid, for as great as he is not Kevin Durant, and he cannot play with every kind of player. He needs specific kind of players to facilitate his game. And like, that is why you can bring in Kyrie Irving, James Harden, and Kevin Durant and have it be historically good on offense. Or you can just bring in another group of guys and it will probably also be historically good on offense because it's Kevin Durant. So, hey, I got to jump out of here, Keith. Thanks so much. I'll keep on with Adam here, or you can keep on with Adam. I'm going to jump on to the Locked On National show now to talk and scream and yell about how happy we are with this. Okay, I'll talk to you guys.
There it goes Doug Norrie again. This guy is a real, he comes and goes now. He's kind of starting to bigwig me here. Keith, I don't want to keep you any longer than we need to. Feel free to take the floor as much as possible. But I do think the one thing I wanted to ask you was, how much were you tempering expectations? Because, we talked about it. I was over on Talking Nets last week, just having that conversation around, listen, don't overreact. If a deal is going to happen, it's going to happen. But I'm just curious, in your heart of hearts, were you secretly fishing for, waiting for, wanting this deal to go down and just saying, I'm not going to say anything, but if it were to happen, you're going to get this type of reaction?
Yeah, I think you and I are more mature than a lot of the fans online. And when we talked on Talking Nets, I'm like, we're just like rational and understand like where we are in the season. We've watched plenty of seasons. We've watched teams and things like that. We just knew not to jump out of the window. I knew not to jump out of the window. I'm on the radio. I work with the Nets. Like, why would I jump out of the window on James Harden if there's a chance that he stays? But today I woke up and I think one of the first tweets I put out, I said, scary hours, but I'm not shook. I just had this feeling this morning that like, oh, it's going down and it's going to work in our favor. And if they actually think that Embiid and Harden together are a lock for the finals, or I hope we play them. The way the seeding is going to work out for us is going to be magical, because I don't think we're going to be able to creep up to the 1 seed. Who knows? But I think we're going to be a lower seed. I think Kyrie's going to be full-time later this month, if not next month. I think Joe Harris, we're going to hear Joe Harris is ramping up to try and play with this team. Like, this is crazy. This is crazy to me.
I love it, dude. Like, I really, now the next thing is like, I can't wait to see these guys on the court. I can't wait to see Ben Simmons on the court. He hasn't even been on playing for Philadelphia. So now all of a sudden it really starts to change again. This is always the piece we talk about. When Kyrie Irving was away from the team and wasn't on the court, some fans or even just national narratives, where's the value? What's his game? Then he steps on the court and you're reminded how good this player can be. I think it's going to be the same sensation when it comes to Ben Simmons. Keith, unless you have a parting thought, I'll let you get out the door. I know that Keith is a man of many talents and a busy schedule. We know you can find them over on WFAN, Talking Nets, KM till AM, 7 to midnight. Are you on officially tonight, 7 to midnight as well?
So I do odds on sports for FanDuel tonight, 6:30 to 7. And then I'll have 20 minutes to talk about this trade and the future of the Nets. I'm so pumped about it. Like, I don't know. I didn't expect us to get all this back. It's the picks for me. Like, we also got first round picks. We needed those. And I just got to remind people again, this is Kevin Durant's team. Kevin Durant almost single-handedly beat the Bucks by himself last year. You put all of these guys around him, it's the scariest of hours. The Brooklyn Nets got scarier. Our world, Nets world. I can't wait to see what it looks like on the floor. I can't wait. I just said to someone that I'm not going to Barclays until after the All-Star break. And now we have a chance for that first game, like February 24th, to have like all of the horses in the stable and this new vamped Nets team. It's our time, man. Start planning the parade. I'll see y'all there.
It's absolutely nuts, man. Thanks again, Keith. I know we'll catch up soon. Go get after it on your end. We're going to switch over here now because waiting in the wings, thank you to Lucas Kaplan. You're going to come up looking like Doug Norrie, but that's okay. We know that you're not really him. And then we also have Saint from Nets Kingdom. He's there in the wings as well. I'm going to bring him up together with us, Lucas, in a minute. But we've had some good conversations with you on the podcast. So I just thought from a basketball standpoint, it'd be good to get you in and just talk about how Ben Simmons is going to fit into this. I mean, I think the benefit of Seth Curry is obviously kind of self-explanatory, but what do you look at the impact of Ben Simmons being on the way the Nets can run things, both defensively and then offensively as well? Because I think the first piece is always easy to say. God, he can be a shutdown defender. Who cares about the shot? But there's a lot of other aspects to the offensive game, and specifically including, I think the first one that comes to mind is like even just the pace and fast break of this team is going to look a lot different with Simmons on the court.
Yeah, I think that's the obvious one. They become a even more well-suited to play up-tempo, to play in transition. We all know what Kyrie can do finishing in the open court. We all know what KD can do scoring from any spot on the floor. And then you have these dynamic shooters, whether it's Seth, Patty, or Joe, or a mix of the three, running, filling those wings, filling those corners in transition. We've heard, I think, a lot of the stats about how Ben Simmons has created 1 trillion threes for his teammates. Part of that being a reluctance to shoot, but part of that being an ability to get into the lane and the height and the length to see any shooter on the floor. They're going to be dynamic and a scary sight when they're coming downhill in transition for sure.
In the same way that Ben Simmons had a reluctance to play at, didn't want to be at a 5. He views himself as a, point forward, whatever, wants to be a ball handler. Do you think that the incredibly different skill sets of one James Harden and one Ben Simmons, while they're polar opposites in so many ways, remembering that when Harden came in, Kyrie said, yeah, cool, man, you're the point guard. I'll play off ball. Do you think that Kyrie will approach this in a similar way of, hey, if you want to handle some possessions, totally. Like I'm willing to be the one that benefits from everything that you can do when you're on the ball, or will the Nets try to utilize Simmons in a different way from what he felt comfortable with in Philly?
Right. I think it'll be a mix of both. I think something we could see is Ben Simmons operating more out of the post. You think back to even these current Warriors, prime Draymond orchestrating with the split cuts with Kyrie, with Curry and Clay. The Nets, with all their tremendous shooting, the guards that we've mentioned, and Kyrie, that could be a lethal weapon for him to either, attack one-on-one. He's still a pretty dynamic finisher around the rim, especially with smaller opponents guarding him. I know we all have the Hawks series burned into our memories, but you can ask NBA defenses if they feel comfortable putting their 6'4" 2-guard on Ben Simmons in the post. See what kind of answers you get. I think we could see more of that in the post, but at the same time, what Kyrie has done so well for the Nets, especially when Harden's been on the court, think back to that West Coast road trip, is sort of the second side actions. Once the ball swings from one wing to the other corner and the defense is already shifting, Kyrie's mindset of, I'm not initiating this play, I'm finishing, really turned him into that 27 point per game, 50, 40, 90 guy, where if he's attacking a imbalanced floor for the defense, it's, again, I keep using this phrase, but a scary, scary sight. So Kyrie, an extremely sort of malleable player, especially around other top-tier talents. He'll be just fine, and I think we'll see a mix of a little bit more initiation, but also the Nets finding creative ways to, use him as the dagger of possession, the play finisher.
We won't keep you too much longer, but the other pieces to it, Seth Curry, obviously 3-point shooter. And if we think that there's any chance that Joe Harris can come back, suddenly you go from having one legitimate, proven, consistent 3-point threat in Patty Mills to maybe having 3, which obviously helps their offense. You can speak to him if you want and just how maybe the secondary aspects of his game that can be good for Brooklyn, but then also Andre Drummond, because I think that it feels like that throwaway piece, and Nets fans can cast their minds back to a time when everybody wanted the Nets to go get Drummond. At the very least, he's a big body that can eat rebounds, and that physicality is something that the Nets have lacked as well, and why fans gravitated towards, Day'Ron Sharpe, saying, just look at him, though. He's banging bodies. Nobody else is capable of doing that. What are the fringe additions of this trade that could really benefit Brooklyn as well?
Well, I have been workshopping, and when I say that, I mean like for the last 10 minutes, a take that I feel pretty confident about in that in the short term, I think Drummond is a bigger boost to this team than Thibault would have been. I think it's interesting that we weren't really thinking about Drummond before as a piece we might want, but he steps into the Nets roster today as I think their best big and their most reliable bet to play 25, 30 minutes a night, especially when you consider the pieces that would be around him on a fully healthy squad. I'm not talking 25 minutes a night of James Johnson and Blake Griffin. I'm talking KD, Joe Harris, Seth, Kyrie full time if that happens, whatever the case may be. But Nets fans are going to really, really like Drummond, and shooting. You can never have too much of it. I'm interested to see how they navigate long term with Seth and Patty. I know this is looking pretty far into the future, but I don't know how confident I would be that both Seth and Patty are on the roster next year, even though they both are under contract. So it'll be interesting to see.
Anything else coming, do you think, around Joe Harris? I mean, the expectations are now maybe he's going to make it back, but there was some speculation that just from a money standpoint, if you bring back in Seth Curry and you have Patty Mills in the short term, you have 2 3-point shooters that you can surround everybody with. And is there an additional piece or a move that the Nets may want to make? And that's just $17 million. And it looks a lot different now as opposed to a year ago when he was the only big 3-point shooting threat. Now suddenly you do have other options.
I could see the Nets spinning this as a positive either way in terms of the picks that are always good. I think everybody within the org, all the fans are quite happy with that draft from last year, even though there weren't any top 25 picks. But armed with those picks, armed with a guy that all the signs kind of point to ownership not really wanting to pay this summer in Claxton, and a guy in Joe Harris, you really have your 3 main ingredients to make a trade. A nice matchable salary in Joe, who may or may not be out for the season. I don't know. A nice, attractive young player that a lot of teams would love to have the bird rights for in Claxton, and these 2 new first-round picks. I don't pretend to be an insider, but it seems to me that the Nets are well positioned to go make another big splash today, and that would be a sign of them saying, no, we're not pushing this back a year. We're not wasting a year of KD's prime. We're going for it right now. We're going for it this year. And the more I think, they believe in that, the more likely they are to trade Joe, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's the classic, we don't rebuild, we just reload, right? That's what this feels like for the Brooklyn Nets. Listen, we're going to get into the fan perspective with Nets Kingdom here in a second. We'll probably, Lucas, be hitting you back up in the very near future for a full-on episode because there's plenty more to mine here, but in the old getting as many perspectives as possible. You can, of course, catch him at Lucas Kaplan over on Twitter with Nets Daily and also with Roll Call SN. Check out all of his work. You heard it here. It's incredibly insightful around the game, how players get utilized, and some of those sets, the plays, the X's and O's that, quite frankly, Doug and I do not get deep enough into to really pull out the value, especially in a trade like this, man. So appreciate your time, and you'll be hearing from us very soon.
Hey, I look forward to it. I really appreciate it. Peace out.
You got it, man. All right. That is Lucas Kaplan. As I said, if you're not listening to him, if you're not following him, if you're not reading his articles, you got to be doing it. And maybe ultimately to round this thing out, patiently waiting in the wings. And arguably, I was supposed to be coming on to Nets Kingdom first and foremost. I know you're going to be showing up here as a Doug Norrie. Everyone's a Doug Norrie alongside me.
Hey, but that's all right. That's all right.
Nets Kingdom, man. I also want to make sure that we got you in because if you don't know, Nets Kingdom is such a representative body of the fan base, of the pure fan reaction. I think, the in-game, the day-to-day, working over on Twitter with the spaces, the pregame, the halftime, the post-game. It's the vent sessions. You've been navigating the emotional roller coaster. But how have you been feeling now that this finally went down? We were in spaces together just yesterday, right? Trying to flesh out positive vibes. I would argue that this is about as positive a vibe as you could possibly ask for.
Yeah, I mean, considering everything, like first and foremost, I'm a 30-year fan, right? Like I don't claim to have sources. I will say since I've been plugged into Twitter, I've been able to talk to more people that do. And it's been nice for that side of the fandom to really enjoy this process. But I've heard some things along the way where I had to keep my mouth shut about some of the things that I knew because I couldn't put somebody like on blast, but it's nice to at least see that came to fruition. But I mean, I'm excited, right? Like, I understand. I'm always the type of person that, like, even if maybe you might be slightly losing a deal, and I don't even want to get into like whether the Nets lost the deal or not. Like, I'm trying to look positive. Is that it's like you look at this and it's like I'm under the proponent. If you don't want to be here, like, you gotta go. And if you can make a trade where you get somebody away and you still are able to bring back assets that, like, because I think Ben Simmons is actually going to work great here. I really do.
Yeah.
Like, I think people have forgotten. Yes, it's just like with Joe Harris. People are just concentrating on the missed threes in the playoffs and negating everything the guy does for the team. Same thing with Ben Simmons. People are looking at some free throws, a couple missed layups, like he has trouble shooting. But yet I encourage people to go watch a bunch of Ben Simmons highlights from last year, just to remind you of like the type of player he is defensively, as a slasher, like the things that he can do passing. So I'm excited for it because it's just like in a relationship. If you don't want to be in it, go, like, leave, like, go where you want to be, because the one thing this team desperately needs is some consistency. And whether it's because of injuries, COVID, whatever it is, we have not been a normal basketball team for darn near 2 seasons now. Go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, no, you heard Lucas Kaplan mentioning there, there's going to be this trickle down effect as far as how the roster fleshes out. Are there guys that you look at on the team now? So we know how good Ben Simmons can be. The Seth Curry piece, I think, is important. And Kaplan made a good point about, Drummond and kind of going, yeah, I guess, whatever, it's Drummond. But all of a sudden, as you recreate this roster, it looks a lot different. Are there players now? And this is maybe the fan perspective that I'm interested in. It's like, Kessler Edwards and Day'Ron Sharpe and Cam Thomas now might not be your time. I think that Kessler Edwards can still have a functionality here because he's a 3-and-D guy, so he still works. But Cam Thomas and Day'Ron Sharpe, this is hey, just go ahead and sit down, enjoy the view, learn a lot here, because these 3 additions in total, they recreate this hierarchy about who's coming in when, where the minutes get delegated to. And those are, I think, are the first 2 pieces that fall. And then you get into veteran guys, like what happens to James Johnson, what happens to Blake Griffin, etc. But everybody is taking a step down on the hierarchy behind all 3 of the players that have been brought in.
Which I think is a good thing, right? Because we had this conversation the other day where it's like you're putting people in positions like you should have known something was wrong, partly wrong in the Nets nation when your rookies were outplaying veteran guys you signed to do certain things, right? And I agree with you. Now this puts it in order. You allow the rookies to be rookies. You can still go to them at time, but you take the pressure off of the other big conversation is like, wow, we're playing these rookies a lot, but how are they going to look in the playoffs, right? Now you take that pressure off. You do put more, like, because I don't know what's going to happen with Joe Harris. Everybody's still out with that, but when you look at like Drummond does at least give you something that we've been begging for, and that has been rebounds, right? Like, he'll give you your inconsistent games of like some games he goes out there and he grabs you 15, 20 rebounds and he has 4 points. But sometimes he goes out there and he gives you a 15 and 20 game or a 15 and 15. And I desperately think it does add to our depth as far as there. Now I'm already seeing reports that they're looking to pivot off Nick Claxton and packaging a couple like picks to now bring in somebody even better. So I think the good thing about the restructuring is that now we're moving people back in their positions. And as much as I may like James Johnson at time, he's not my option to be like a first option to come in. Like, this guy should arguably be like a third option. So the other thing I'm excited about this is that it is pushing those lower bottom guys have been getting way more playing time than we've wanted them to, now in their correct positions, and we can go to more consistent players. And it's going to be interesting to see, with this trade, now what do the Nets do with picks, with getting rid of some lower level guys? Now you're clearing a space. You got rid of Paul Millsap, so you take that out of the argument. I'm not sure if that's answering your question, but like, I think this is a great thing. You're reordering your roster the way it should be at the end of the day.
This, by the way, is, I think, when Doug and I would push back, it's not even pushback. When fans were getting really excited about Day'Ron Sharpe, it was just about, you got to temper expectations about what you expect a rookie to do. And if the idea was by the way, a team that wants to win a championship, if your goal is to win a championship, and you think that inserting a rookie at the 5 and expecting him to get big rebounds and be a big component of the pick and roll offense and all those things, it was never a knock on his game. It was just saying this is not a kid that you don't want to put a kid in that spot, right? Where it literally a crucial role. And that's where I think the Drummond piece matters, because it is size, it is a big body, and whatever he lacks in his game, he's got that locked down. So now you set that standard, and the play off of that becomes LaMarcus Aldridge. And we kind of talked about this when the team was at its healthiest. The second unit is supposed to be this Patty Mills, LaMarcus Aldridge, familiarity, right? Mixing a couple other pieces around them, balance it out between now Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving at times and some of that overlap. That gets back to a more comfortable space here too. And I think you're better suited to have someone who's going to be a little more physical early for you and then play off of that as the game works along. But just specifically to this idea about moving off of Claxton, it's one of those up and down things. Now, in the same breath that I downplay Day'Ron Sharpe, I fell in love with Claxton, right? Over the life cycle. Exactly. But now you're in this weird spot where not only has he had a lot of ups and downs with injuries, he's not quite the right fit, even though he has all this defensive versatility. And I still think, by the way, this is where it's different between Day'Ron and Nicholas Claxton. If they don't move him, but he's a young piece and you can put him with picks and bring in something else. If he remains on the roster, he's still your spot defensive pickup when you get into these playoff matchups and you say, what if you're staring down the barrel of Ben Simmons and Nicholas Claxton out there picking up the two most difficult, assignments on the defensive end? So I'll be fine if they bring in something else because it means they're ramping themselves back up. But I think even right now in this moment, you still see all this versatility that this trade creates for the team as well.
Yeah, and that was my kind of when people were pushing back heavy on making the trade for James Harden, and moving him to Philly. And it's like the way I looked at it was that if you move off of James Harden, you allow yourself to now then solidify those areas of concern that you've been talking about all season, right? Like it opens you up, because the other issue I had here with this team was like, yeah, great. When you have the big three and the big three are healthy and they're all there playing full time, it masks so many issues and you can get away with it. But I think we've ran the course on the experiment with the big three that it's actually going to work and be viable. And I do believe having the big three left you vulnerable in so many areas. And now we're off of that. And like you said it best, it's like, even if you just look that we don't make a trade and you add Ben Simmons or even Claxton, like in a defensive position, now you have Claxton that can go out, and we've seen him lock up smaller guards considerably. And now you have Ben Simmons who can lock up and handle bigger guys. Like, I'm not saying he's going to stop Giannis, right? But I feel a lot more comfortable throwing Ben Simmons' defensive abilities onto Giannis while Nicholas Claxton is handling somebody like Middleton or Holiday. You know what I mean? Like that is a very interesting thing to see. I think they're done with Claxton. I think they are going to try to pivot off him, but in an event he stays, that just only bodes well for the Nets as far as from a defensive standpoint. And the thing with Simmons, like just the idea of like people saying, well, he doesn't know how to shoot. It's like, now imagine if you're Ben Simmons and you have like a death lineup out there and you got Ben Simmons and you're playing small ball. Now all of a sudden he's going to turn around and he cuts to the paint. He's got the ball and there's like 2-3 defenders. He's now going to be able to kick out to Kyrie, KD, Joe Harris, Seth Curry, and Patty Mills. Bro, that to me sounds better than James Harden and the big three, if I'm being honest.
And that's that big piece about Ben Simmons being a high-level passer, right? And I think this always leans into what Ben wanted to be. Doesn't want to be a 5, doesn't want to be even a forward, right? He wants to be a power guard, right? He wants to be bringing the ball up the court, but he does have the court vision. He is a willing passer. So it is this weird dynamic now where you shift to saying, yeah, the fact that you can't shoot when you have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and Patty Mills and Seth Curry and maybe Joe Harris, turns out it doesn't matter nearly as much as it does when you're on a team, and especially before this season, that has a player like Tobias Harris, who was having his struggles and underperforming to his contract, and suddenly how your game needs to evolve looks a lot different than if everyone's filling the roles that they're supposed to. Real quick here too, we always say on the podcast, we like to bring up stats and numbers when they help make our point. When we've talked about Raptor ratings on this team, going back just these last 3 seasons for Ben Simmons, he started out his career as being a pseudo plus, slight minus on defense. Since then, though, he just ticked his boxes up. And last year, he was a net plus 2.5. And the real takeaway here is positive on both ends of the floor, because when you go over and look at some of the ratings for the Nets roster, there was also this stark contrast. We know James Harden, elite offensive, total negative defensively. Kyrie Irving, elite offensive, somewhat neutral defensively, right? So I also think that there's a balancing of this team when you bring in Ben Simmons now, and the reliability that you get with him there. Listen, let's just say from a fan perspective then, because we were walking through, I was in the spaces when you guys were doing a great job hosting them. The only thing I pushed back on, or that I came up short of, was, and I think you did the same, was like, I'm not here to trash James Harden. Like, things happen, right? There's a whole thing that happened with Ben Simmons in Philadelphia. That's what leads you to this point. Do you understand why James Harden got to the place of wanting to get out of Brooklyn right here in this moment? Or do you think that he was short-sighted in pulling this trigger too quickly and not being willing to say, hey, if I hold water here, I only need to wait another few weeks before Durant's back, and the mandate could change here, and all of a sudden the version of this team is back, and maybe I can go win a title this year? Because I don't, apples to apples, man. You don't sit here. I know the Nets odds for the title came down a little bit. The odds for Philadelphia went up a little bit, but I'm still taking the Brooklyn Nets in a 7-game series against the 76ers, if that's what it comes down to in the playoffs.
Yeah. Okay. I got a few I got mixed emotions, right? Like, I'm an older person. I've always remained to try to stay balanced, like look at it from both sides. And it's like, if I'm James Harden, like, I'm going to forget his history of not being happy in situations and then the things he does, right? Like, I'm going to remove that. And I'm going to look at, if I'm James Harden walking into this, outside of the Kyrie thing, right? Like, whatever your feelings are there, that is a problem, right? Like, no shot at Kyrie. I do believe Kyrie had he had a choice to make, and he chose what he thought was best for him. But guess what? That choice affects the team. And I do think that did weigh on James Harden. Like, I'm thoroughly convinced the fact that you have a part-time superstar player, for whatever your vibe and feeling is on it, like, I'm pretty sure it bothered him. Right. And then he's watching people go down around him. He's looking at the roster and he's like, yo, this roster is not built to sustain this. Now KD's out. Like, I get the frustration, but I kind of keep going back to what JJ said the other day. Like, yo, like, this is what, like, when the times get tough, like, this pretty much like shows who you are as a person and a player, about giving up and being tough. So I'm not going to go like harsh, but I do think James Harden is quitting. And I can understand his concerns, but I also believe James Harden's wanting to have been in Philly the whole time. The more and more that this like looks at and I think about it, I get that vibe. I do believe he is quitting. I am thoroughly convinced on that. Like, I understand, outside of the Kyrie thing and maybe some roster construction, I can't really think of anything else that like he could really be mad about. Right. Unless we're not privy to some conversations, other stars, other players, like maybe pushing on him saying, yo, like, you need to do this and do that. And then you had a complete breakdown in the locker room. Like, then I could also understand that. But he quit, plain and simple. He thinks it's going to be greener on the other side. I think he's in for a rude awakening. I don't think he's going to return back to the James Harden form that we're used to seeing, like, in Houston. I think we dodged a bullet by trading him. This trade allows us to get back to the flexibility and to more continuity with the team. It allows us to get back to where we were before the James Harden trade. I got a lot of smoke for questioning the James Harden trade to begin with, because I was a fan of adding KD, Kyrie, and then looking at what Sean Marks built. And I even said from the beginning, like, yeah, it's James Harden, but I wish we never made that trade. And people came at me for it. And
there is a weird piece. I kind of touched this a little bit in the last episode of the podcast, where, again, when you're presented with the opportunity to add another elite talent like that, we've been saying you make the trade 1,000 times out of 1,000. Now now reflectively, you can look back and think, and this is about teams building big threes all around the league, right? When it works, then it all made sense. When things start to get fractured or things don't look like they're trending in the right direction, then you look back and say, well, what about Jared Allen? What about Karis LeVert? What would a deeper supporting cast behind Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving look like? The other thing that I think we do now is we take a look at this and we say, remember, the Nets gave up a ton to accomplish getting James Harden. But if you want to go a little bit reflective or retroactive, you say, at the end of the day, the Brooklyn Nets traded Jared Allen, they traded Karis LeVert, and a handful of picks to ultimately end up with Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Drummond, right? And you can even extend it to Patty Mills and what this team looks like now. Like, and by the way, it's total revisionist history, and you're glossing over the part where it got messy for a minute there.
Very much so.
But this is where you are now, right? This is where you are now. You're still going to have a couple of assets to make an additional move. And arguably, and maybe to your point of being someone who pushed back on it in the moment, could this have been a better version of it, right? Could you have gotten deeper like this without it costing you as much? But it does take Ben Simmons refusing to play for Philadelphia to be available for a buy low value, right? That isn't one of those things you go, oh, well, there's always a potential superstar talent who's just kind of sitting on the sidelines waiting to be plucked.
Yeah, I mean, we can play the what if game. I mean, if I'm being honest, I kind of find it laughable that we get to this point. And like my favorite part of all this is James Harden just released an Adidas video campaign that's supposed to come out on February 13th, right? And one of his videos that was just posted was him explaining why he chose number 13. And now he's about to go to Philly where number 13 is retired, right? Like, so I'm like
what I meant was the reason why I chose 33 was because
exactly right. Like, I don't know. I'm just I mean, ultimately, I guess in some way, I don't want to look at this as like redemption, but like, I'm happy it turned out this way. It could have gotten a lot worse, right? Like, you could have not been able to secure a trade for James Harden. And then you have this disgruntled man where, quite honestly, let's be real. If this goes to the offseason, this goes so many different ways that could hurt the Nets comparison to making a trade right now. And no matter what you get back for him, right? Like, some people were willing to take just Ben in a pick and they were like, just do it, right? Some of us were like, no, don't give in, Marks. Like, at least stand your ground, at least get enough back to make it palpable and acceptable. And I feel like Sean Marks has done that with this trade. It's an acceptable trade. You get some flexibility back. You get a couple pieces that if obviously Curry's staying, but and I do believe Drummond's staying, right? Like, at least with those two pieces, they're much better than some of the stuff we've been seeing coming from the Nets bench already, right? So you got a positive there. You got a positive with Ben. Now you have two picks that you can go out and combine with another player and possibly bring back even more more assets that you can go to and consistent. And I think, again, now all you have to do is solve the Kyrie conundrum. And you do that coupled with what we got. Yes, there's 29 games left. You have a lot of work to do. You have a lot of continuity to get to. You have a lot of people working on the same page. There's no guarantee that this is a championship run. We are going to be a playoff team. I am convinced of that. I think we can easily make up 5 games and 29. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're only that's the other positives too, is that the standings, we're an 8th seed, but we're also 5 games out of first. Like, how could, if you want to look at for a silver lining and be positive, if you told me that at the beginning of the season that you were going to have no Kyrie full games, you were going to trade James Harden, you were going to get all this back and only be 5 games out of first and have about 30 games to go make a chance to get into the playoff and make a run, I would call you, like, who would have thought of that? Like, nobody envisioned that. So I do believe there is a positive window for the Nets to get out of this. And we'll see. I mean, this is now the wait and see. How does it all come together? And if it works, I mean, it's a W. I mean, you have to look at it that way.
Yeah, and I think the best thing they accomplished was avoiding whatever was going to look like in the offseason. Because, again, when we talked about it, the worst part to me was looking at a 33-year-old James Harden and a max contract and an extension and what that was going to cost you on the back end. You bring in a guy who's in his mid-20s, arguably about to enter his prime, if he can, clean himself up and get back on the court. And then you still are going to have some level of financial flexibility in this offseason, depending on what else happens on this deadline. I'm sure, in case people don't know, and people are already calling you out in the chat anyway, but when are you going on, over on YouTube with Nets Kingdom?
Well,
and I know you're on Spaces as well.
I'm double dipping right now. I'm still co-hosting in Spaces, but I'm going to go back over there. And then I think after the game tonight, we will be on YouTube and Nets Kingdom. You're more than welcome to come by. We will be on there. That is going to be a very spicy stream. There was a lot of Harden stands, a lot of people. Like, we've already had an exodus of people out of our Discord. I think I saw like 30, 40 people stop following me on like Twitter. Like, it's like the good thing about like losing James Harden is that the James Harden stands are now gone. I can go back to having some normal conversations with people that want to actually have a legit discussion about James Harden. But to your point, real quick, I don't know if you're bringing somebody up and it is getting probably that time, but like, this trade gets us flexible now. It gets us flexible after the season. And I quite honestly, you don't make this trade, it makes it extremely like that window closes so close that, like, how would you, if you were Sean Marks and what you have to work with, if you never traded James Harden to try to fix this ship, right? Like, because that's ultimately like before the whole James Harden drama, I was kind of like, yo, Marks, this is the time you got to use the TPEs. You got to do the buyout market. You got to shake the trees. You got to try to do whatever you can to get rid of some of the similar players off this team and use every avenue you have. And let's be honest, that was going to be a hard sell with some of the things that Nets players, like the ownership, like probably the players wanted, the fans. Like, you saw so many off the wall trade scenarios. And at the end of the day, it was like, yo, what do you really have to get that? Right. And now this deal, it changed the whole landscape of flexibility, which I think if we can all agree about Sean Marks, I feel like Sean Marks's GOAT status was on the line with this a little bit, because I don't think we could have sat back and got like another another interview with him going, well, we just felt comfortable with what we had going forward. Like, I don't think that would have done this time. So he puts himself back in his power position, in my opinion, which I think for him is flexibility. He now has picks. He now has players. He has so many things that he can play with to make the team better now and in the offseason. So
and I think,
I mean, that's a W in itself.
Yeah, and specifically when we just think about the idea of $17 million in Joe Harris, it's about 8.4, I think, on Seth Curry. Might go up a little bit next year. You talk about obviously the $6 million in Patty Mills. Now some of these guys aren't going anywhere. Some of them are going to be here forever. But you see the amount of money that's occupied there. You come down $10 million on what Ben Simmons represents on the cap as well. So all of a sudden you shrink those numbers down a little bit, and it'll be a wait and see with Kyrie Irving, obviously. But the other little thing too is, because we can extend, as long as you have comments to make about it. But the other little piece seemed to be that people are still confused why Kevin Durant just fits with Kyrie Irving. Like, he just likes it. I mean, on a personal level, they are legitimately buddies. They wanted to do this thing, right? We all know the Nets signed Kyrie because it helps to land Kevin Durant. And that's the part of it where this seems to be that piece of it. And I'll be very curious to see how Ben Simmons comes and meshes in with this, because then it changes what this path forward looks like. And there is this, I just had this thought about the way getting Anthony Davis to the Lakers for LeBron James, a guy that is significantly younger and helps extend this window. They won their title. Now they're dealing with their own problems because they made a disastrous decision to bring in Russell Westbrook. That's, for the history books to chronicle. But I think that's that thing that they've done here, is extended this window and said, well, now as these guys get older, by the way, we talk about Kyrie Irving in the same pool as Kevin Durant and James Harden. He's 3-4 years younger than both of those guys, right?
Yes.
Kyrie
that's
Irving
at least a positive.
Yeah, he's just in his prime. Now, and again, who knows what this will look like in the offseason. This entire decision, though, and everything that happened here ran through the Kevin Durant filter, right? There's indications that he was talking with Ben Simmons ahead of it, that this was something that he had in the works. So again, when we get to the offseason, I never hold these things against any individual players, But if you tell me that there's another player, whether it's Bradley Beal, whether it's Dame Lillard, right? If there's this other thing that exists where it ends up being Kevin Durant, Ben Simmons, and someone else, that's also how you extend this window, depending on what the age is of the incoming player. But it's interesting, and I know that's way more down the line than we used to do in the podcast.
You make two great points, because I said this before I kind of was on Spaces, where it's like, even if at the end of the day we come to the offseason and Kyrie Irving's situation goes extremely south, right? Like, we're just going to entertain that idea. And the Nets are not comfortable extending them. There's no guarantees. It's like, at the end of the day, Kevin Durant's a businessman. He signed an extension, and I don't think he's just going to be like, peace out. I think he loves where he's at. I think he loves what he's doing. And you have that. Now you have Ben Simmons. You have another insurance along with, like you said, Katie and Ben have been in contact. The thing about this move also regarding to Kyrie Irving is now you're giving yourself some more, insurance with the rest of the season without a full-time Kyrie. You know, now you add Ben in there. Now you add Seth in there. Now you add Drummond in there. You're adding 3 players that you can now count on that weren't there. And what? You only had to give away James Harden and Paul Millsap. Paul Millsap wasn't even playing. So you take James Harden out, right? James Harden been mad consistent this year. It's just the reality. You've seen spurts of good games, but then you've seen a lot of quitting, a lot of lackadaisical defense. And now you remove all that, and now you have insurance that at least when we go home, you have players, and especially when KD comes back and Joe, I think Joe's not going anywhere. And now when you add LA, Joe Harris, KD back after the All-Star break, hopefully all 3 of them, coupled with what we just added, you no longer feel the pain of Kyrie at home games. And it gives you a little bit more comfortability, in my opinion, going forward into a playoffs where you just have to rely on James Harden, where you now, because I don't think it's wrong to say, you didn't know what James Harden you were going to, after a certain point in the season when it became obvious with James Harden, you had no idea what James Harden you were going to get.
Yep.
And it's sad that it took somebody like Reggie Miller to remind James Harden who he was, right? I argued, hire Reggie Miller to talk to James Harden before every game to remind him, right? And it's sad that a player has to get to this point. And he's, James Harden's got a lot of work ahead of him. He's got a PR nightmare with his marketing, with all this stuff. And now he's got to go to an all-star game where now he's completely wearing a different jersey. And I hope Kevin Durant doesn't choose him on his team. That shit would be hilarious. Excuse the language. But now he then has to go and prove all the reasons that he, quote, wanted to leave the Nets. Now he's got to go to a whole new area where the fans are just as unforgiving as we are to prove that you're James Harden, that you're going to be worthy of a $60 million contract when it's all said and done a year.
Yeah, and arguably the only difference, and that we're going to get out of here, but the only difference too is that exact piece. For whatever happened with Ben Simmons in Philadelphia, it came down to a missed opportunity to put up a bucket, right? There was never a question about his effort on the court. It just came down to the end of their season, the end of a playoff run, and then this disastrous relationship falling apart. And it doesn't mean that isn't a concern, or that you don't look at that and go, okay, let's see how that plays itself out. But the piece about the on-court thing with Harden effectively showing you, right? James Harden is too talented of a player to give you a 4-point performance in a game against the Sacramento Kings. And I think that that's the interesting part, is that Harden had a willingness to do that on the court in a game that mattered, right? That's a heart piece. That's certainly an effort question and all those things. Whether or not fans want to judge Ben Simmons for effectively saying, I'm not coming back to it, it's fair. But I do think that that's going to be interesting to watch. And arguably for Nets fans, even though he's not on the team anymore, and we're going to embrace what the new roster looks like, you will look over there. And if James Harden comes out and throws down a 40-point performance on his first game in a Philadelphia 76ers uniform, Nets fans are going to go, you son of a, there you are doing exactly what you did.
Yeah. That just adds, that's bad for him, because that just shows you were out here dogging it, and you were just being a whiny, whatever, to get where you wanted. And now all of a sudden you're going to show up because at the end of the day, I don't know how smart you are to walk away from playing with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and the potential of what else they could have done, because the very limited time that we saw all 3 of them, and I'll just keep using the Chicago game as an example, is they literally showed you with those 3 and 2 rookies that at a third quarter, I think, the 9:46 mark or 8-minute mark, all the way to the fourth quarter of the 8-minute mark, they go on like a 40-8 run, right? And they show you like, hey, that's great. You've been keeping up with us all game, but now here's a gear that and a level that you can't reach. And they drop that level on that. And it's like how you walk away from that. I understand there's a lot of things in the way of that, but how you walk away from that and think you're going to go over to Philly and it's going to miraculously like be better for you is laughable to me. I do think he is walking into a little bit more of a stable rotation. They didn't have to give up a ton. They didn't have to lose their Thibault. They didn't have to lose their Maxey. Like, granted, I think, but he is walking into a team that's like one injury away from Embiid from let's be honest, right? Like Embiid is a bit of a fragile guy too. And it's like, he's not in a much better situation, a little more stability, but yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, this needed to happen. I think this is going to be a W. There's a lot of work to be done for the Nets. And I'm excited going forward. Even if it's not this year, I feel a lot better going into next season.
And typically it's the best player on a team that chooses to leave, not what is clearly the second best player, right? Or the third best player, whatever your hierarchy. That's also a part of it too. Listen, we said we wanted to do this. Obviously, I'll be looking forward to the link later. I'll probably try to get in there after we record a post-game pod, which should be about 3% on the game and 97% on obviously this situation for the Brooklyn Nets. But if you're not aware, and I don't know how you could be, Nets Kingdom does a great job, obviously being a representation of where the fan base is, the pulse of it, and also trying to keep the fan base on a bit of an even keel. So Saint and everybody else, I mean, just run down the laundry list of all the guys that are involved real quick, because I know there's a group of you that are executing that on a daily basis.
AJ was the head guy, started it about last season at some point, and then AJ brought on me, we're not to the point yet where we're throwing our real names 100% out there. We're getting to that, right? But listen, but it's me, Chubbs, Rage, Julian, like we cover a large mix of fan base and ages, right? Like I'm the oldest. Clearly you could see from the gray beard. And then it literally goes down the myriad of somebody in their 30s, somebody in their 20s, and Rage being the youngest. And it's like, we just come at it from a fan base perspective. We've been able to get some good reporters on there. We've been able to get people with resources on there. And it's just, we do it for the love of the game and the love of the team. And we try to keep it even keeled. We try to cover all sides of arguments, like playing the devil advocate. We like to have fun. If you've watched our show, like you've seen, we've made fun of Kyrie during this, right? Like, where's Kyrie? And every week, like we had like Kyrie's head posted on what he's doing when he's not playing, right? Like we've given it to James Harden, Claxton. Like we try to have fun, but keep it serious and really enjoy talking about the Nets. And I appreciate you bringing me up on here. I've been enjoying watching you and Doug and really talking with you on Spaces. You're one of the smartest guys I talk to. You try to come at it from like a very analytical aspect. You try to come at it with facts, but you also put your heart into it. And that I appreciate and always will. So I'm glad we did this. And you will be coming up later. So I do appreciate it, man.
You got it, man. Saint, Nets Kingdom, go do it. And we'll be catching up later tonight. Appreciate you, man. All right, let's go ahead and roll it over here. Tie a bow on this thing. We thought maybe Doug Norrie would get back in here with me. Obviously, he's trying to do the national piece for the Locked On Network around it. We're going to go ahead and listen, we all know what the deal was as far as what the Brooklyn Nets have accomplished here. I pulled up over on Twitter, just getting a sense of where some of these other deals have been. I don't even know if it's going to be worth running through some of them. There's a lot of these little parts kind of happening here around the NBA, some other smaller trades, I guess you would call them, relative to what the Brooklyn Nets have accomplished here. I'm just trying to take a quick peek over here. And it looks like, so there you go too. You got Woj in the past hour just talking about the Brooklyn Nets are still working to be aggressive in more deal making today, armed with the 2 new first-round picks. So going to be some speculation around who they're going to be trying to attack to bring in here. Again, just from a numbers standpoint, I'll go ahead and just get a quick look here over at Andre Drummond's contract numbers, because theoretically, you took on whatever the value is of, with $33 million on the books coming into the season for Ben Simmons. You're also talking about another 8.4 from the Seth Curry piece. You're getting out $44 million off of the books with James Harden. And then if you think about, and by the way, Millsap was sent back over there as well. So you still also get him, which only effectively becomes 2.6 million. And again, some prorated amount of that over the remainder of the year. But you have created some level of cap flexibility. You can look at the James Johnsons of the world. We've talked before about Bruce Brown. He obviously has the no trade clause, but does have 4.7 million on the books as well. And then 2.7 in the chat. Thank you, because multitasking is not the strongest piece for me. So like for like swap essentially with Millsap and Drummond and the money that's going to represent. But if the Nets are looking around the league and they think there's another opportunity here to strengthen this roster, whether or not it comes down to Nicholas Claxton and his very small 1.7, and then looking into strengthening the depth of this team, I don't know if it's going to be adding another 3-and-D, prospect potentially, or looking at the hierarchy of the bigs and saying whatever overutilization we have with James Johnson, that's clear cut. Where do we think we are on Blake Griffin and the value to this roster going forward now that you've introduced Drummond, who's a more physical player, a rebound player? If he's getting pushed down the hierarchy, do you want to have a little bit of a clearer value system on the 5 on this roster, LMA, Drummond? Do you want another bigger rebounding piece and the way that they may look to go ahead and attack it? I'll pull up a couple of commentaries here over on YouTube as well. Durant right now for Giannis Bucks. All right, looks like you guys are lost in the sauce here a little bit on a different conversation, right? I don't know, so we take Giannis and hopes how he is better. Yeah, listen, there's some different things there. Oh, greater than that. Well, okay, the statement is KD greater than Giannis. I don't know, man. We've talked about this before. There's some clear-cut hierarchies to where the top elite talents are, and they all fall into this really nice, big, healthy group. And then you have second-tier players, etc. But the speculation on who's the better, who's the best, that's okay. And actually, I don't mind this take here either as well about they better not get rid of Blake. I said this before earlier here as the deadline was looming, and I'll still stick to it. And I'm not here talking to you about saying that Blake Griffin is an integral part to this roster, but I do think that he's represented that little bit of grittiness, that toughness. If you're someone who listens to Nets Kingdom, you know that they're guys that have followed this team since back in New Jersey. And I think that there are important aspects to that when we talk about maintaining some level of bench value, of bench attitude, and bench mentality. So it'll be interesting to see how some of these things flesh out. The good news is, as we start to head into the wrap-up roundup session here, Doug Norrie's back in after a national media spotlight shone so bright on him. We ran through the circus, man. We had Keith McPherson with everything he had. I already said it. Lucas Kaplan came in and we just, we did him for a short window, but I immediately said, so we'll just go ahead and get you on the podcast in the next day or so, because the X and O's, the value, it was just too short of a time to break down how all these players fit in, even though he gave the 7 great bullet points of how effective all these players can be in it. I just highlighted that the other news here in the last hour is that the Nets are still focusing on making another deal here, now loaded with 2 first-round picks from this trade. Do you have any sense of what position the Nets should be? Not the sense of it, you're not an NBA insider per se, but where should the Nets focus if they're looking to add another piece? Do you look at it as, well, a 3-and-D guy and get even more arsenal on the wings here? Do you look at it as another big-bodied rebounding player? Because it looks like at least Claxton could be a component of this for a team that wants some young asset, relatively low cost, and still not knowing whether or not Joe Harris is a piece of this with that $17 million.
Yeah, size is definitely going to be a key here, I think. Adding Drummond is kind of sneaky interesting, I think, to see what happens with him.
And Kaplan touched on that, yeah.
Yeah, because that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't check in for that. Was he a fan of that? Because the more I thought about that one, I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, you don't want Andre Drummond to be your, 4th highest paid player, but when he's like your 9th highest paid player and he plays, an 18 minutes a game of offensive rebounding and like a little bit of like pick and roll stuff, like you can talk yourself into it. And so I thought that was like a sneaky size addition, because it's like weird. Drummond's entered this stage of his career where if you picture Andre Drummond looking for a max contract version of him, it's terrible. But this is like sort of what's happened with Andrew Wiggins, but like this is way less than that. But it's like once you remove what the old contract and stuff used to be and just look at what you're getting him for now, it becomes a totally different proposition. So when I thought back about the Drummond thing, I was like, oh, that's kind of like maybe a sneaky good size piece for them. I mean, like defending Joel Embiid or, like things like that. So it's interesting. I don't think he should start or anything, but I think that there's going to be situations where you're not going to actually probably mind having him for the things that he maybe can just lean into that he does well.
One thing we touched on with Kaplan was just this idea of like, the Nets were so hungry for a big body guy that when Day'Ron Sharpe steps out there, you go, maybe he's the guy that should play 25 minutes because you just want the physicality, and it's better to obviously have the veteran version of it. And I think he couched it in that same sense of for a certain amount of minutes. We're not saying, and now you plug yourself in. I will just, in general NBA news, tap into the fact that Woj just said the Mavericks are trading Kristaps Porzingis to the Wizards for a package center around Spencer Dinwiddie. How about that for some action?
Crazy. He was rumored. He was looking like he was gonna go. Oh, where was it? Toronto? No. Shoot. There was a rumor about him before. I'm all trade deadlined out here at this point. That's crazy. I need a second to think about that. I like that for the Mavericks. That means, it has to mean Jalen Brunson's getting traded, right? There's only 20 minutes to go in this thing. You'd think that means they were moving off Brunson's money, but
why do I feel like I'm in a pie eating contest, right? That's coming down. You only got 20 minutes. Keep getting the mouthfuls in, guys.
It's weird about that because the last 3 moves by them was to send stuff, was to ship pieces off. This is the Wizards. They shipped off Montrezl Harrell and they shipped off Aaron Holiday, and to the Hornets and then to the Suns. So I'm like, okay, they're in full sell mode. But then to bring back Kristaps, I'm gonna need a second to process that one. I'm not gonna give a hot take on that.
It feels like a team that maybe is at least still thinking about the idea of what do we look like long term if we don't want Bradley Beal to be here. Maybe that you're just trying to flesh out what your best case scenario could potentially be. But Bradley, we did it. You don't have to go anywhere. You're in the play-in. Why do you want to leave?
That's crazy. I'm shocked by that. Yeah. So anyway, I don't know. I know Lucas is great with the X's and O's. And so I'm sure he gave a more detailed breakdown about how some of that stuff. I will say this, we're probably thinking about wrapping it up here. We've been at this for, going on 2 hours. I don't know if you want to keep going, but
no. I was just going to say, we did the Keith McPherson, which I think we covered the spectrum here, including Saint from Nets Kingdom of just like the X's and O's, the somewhat analytical about it, the approach from maybe a personal side, because Keith always talks about body language when he watches the games and some things that have gone on. And then this pure fan spectrum where Saint obviously lives in. But I think just end of the day here, there's a game, by the way, later tonight for Brooklyn, in case anyone's interested. This was a win in your eyes for the Brooklyn Nets, what they accomplished, and now starting to get into this sense of what does this team look like? And with this extra move potentially coming here for Brooklyn, this could still look like a stronger championship contender before the 4 o'clock deadline comes, or 3 o'clock.
Yeah, let's just stay in here. We got another 20 minutes. Let's just stay through. Let's see if anything comes in here over the last little bit, because I have a couple other thoughts which we'll get to on the podcast. By the way, if you're in here right now, hit subscribe on the podcast. We're getting almost to 1,000 over here on YouTube. So if you're in YouTube and you're leaving comments anyway, just go over and hit the subscribe button, and let's get to 1,000. Let's see if we can we got enough people in here now that if 14 people of you are not subscribers, that we can get to 1,000 while we're talking. And I would be a fan of that. Yeah. So the more I thought about this as I was waiting to get onto the Locked On thing, which took a little longer than expected, the more I was just like, man, the Nets did pretty well in this. You almost can never be the team that sends out the best player in the trade almost always loses. So let me put it that way. Historically, if you send out the best player, no matter what you got back, short term, you always lose. And then long term, you kind of lose because you need a lot of other stuff to go right. You need to nail the draft picks. There's a lot of other moving parts here that you need to get right. Right. So it can take a long time to figure out whether you do it right. And most teams aren't good enough to do it correctly. And so that's why it almost always looks bad. Mm-hmm. The context around this piece was getting so weird that it is one of those rare situations where you and it's funny because this has happened now twice with Harden, where it's the situation gets so weird that you're sending out the best talent, but you're is the juice worth the squeeze? And we may be finding out that it's not, because when it's going really well for him, it's great. We saw it last year for longer windows. The guy was playing at almost MVP levels last year. It's it's not that. It's for there's windows of Harden where it looks amazing. And we were just getting too many examples of when it's not all set up perfectly. And maybe he's just had too long of a career with this. Like maybe he needs to be a little bit forgiven, because it's like he shouldered the load for a long time in Houston, and he did a great job with that until it kind of really counted. They came really close to the promised land. They came like an all-time bad 3-point shooting game away from upending the Warriors 4 years ago with Chris Paul. Like, if they don't shoot like 3 for 30 or whatever they did in game 7, and they still barely lost, they just go to the finals and probably win. And his whole narrative is totally different. And then, the Russ thing obviously doesn't really work. And then he asks for out. And it's kind of like all been downhill from there. And so there could be a thing where he's just like, doesn't want to do it anymore. I kind of don't know what he thinks is going to happen here in Philly. Like now that they shipped off kind of a lot of other shooters and stuff like Seth Curry, but it was just one of these situations where it just kind of at this point had to happen. So yes, you send off the best player. Because they have Kevin Durant, I think you can talk yourself into getting, 75 cents plus on the dollar and feeling better about it, because it's still all going to fit. But one would hope.
Yeah.
But it's funny about how quickly we can talk ourselves back into Ben Simmons just being like level-headed and fine and ready to go and and be able to shoulder like some, responsibility and stuff, because there's like not a million tons of evidence of that either.
Well, this was the only thing I brought it up with Saint from Nets Kingdom of, and it's just splitting hairs here, Donnie, to say that the one difference, and I think the one thing you can hold against James Harden is just choosing not to show up in a game. Like you're to play in a game, we said the 4-point performance against the Kings, like to just actively choose to dog it out on the court. I think that's the thing that, whether it pushes Nets fans or just from a pure sports analyst standpoint, I don't know. Like when I look at it, I go, dude, like you're too good to go out there and do that. At that point, just fake the injury and say that you can't go out and play, because that's a far worse look. I guess in theory, you look at Ben Simmons and you can say, hey, it was a really bad decision to not go for the shot and to pass out of it, and it's a bad look for you, but it wasn't an effort thing. It was a confidence thing. And then everything happens behind the scenes. It's bad. You say, I'm just not going to play. I'm not going to do it. But I don't think you can still tread the fine line of saying, but Ben Simmons isn't a guy that doesn't give maximum effort. He's just a guy that doesn't want to be a part of that situation anymore. Yeah. James Harden's a guy who, once he decides he doesn't want to be a part of it, he's also like, and by the way, I'll put on pounds, or I'll dog it. I won't show up, whatever the case may be. And you're probably right. There's some reasonable expectation around being a player of his caliber and just never getting to where you think you should be, or at least being in an organization where you think you get that chance. It does seem like a fast timeline to go from, I've done this, I played at an MVP level for this team last year, and I'm already out on it, understanding all the hiccups that have come along. I mean,
he never did himself any favors by like saying any of the right stuff, or like looking like it was a one way, but it was a different way. Like it's look, and you don't have to. It's not your job to get out there onto the front cover of like the tabloids and like say all the right things. I'm not saying that, but it was clear that they wanted it to happen. I mean, he opted into his contract. He opted into the extension immediately. Not the extension. He opted into the player option for next year immediately as the trade went on, which I'm sure again was crucial to the same way we talked earlier about, you're not talking to Simmons unless he says, yeah, dude, I'm ready to go. Like Morey's not taking Harden back. He's like, dude, you just have to tell me that you're opting in before we're
making the trade. I'll see about it. I'll see how I feel in the offseason.
He's like, we'll see, dude. I don't know. But then you start envisioning Simmons in the fit, and I'm sure like Lucas or Nets Kingdom guy, or maybe even Keith talked into this, but like when you start picturing him as like a 6'11" version of like Bruce Brown, like a supercharged short roll transition guy who can make reads, who can push pace, who can like kind of actually be the ball handling piece of what we thought we were getting with Bruce Brown a little bit. And like that, like I said, like that sort of like small ball center, like make reads out of the short roll, get to the basket, get your defender downhill if you have a mismatch. Like he's the ultimate version of that kind of guy. And we saw Bruce Brown got paid last year when playing with some of these other dudes because they were able to kind of supercharge the things he did well. It looked way worse when they did not have the other guys around him all the time, like specifically Kyrie and KD for like long stretches. And so when you don't have any floor spacing, like a guy like Bruce Brown really gets worse. But if it's Seth Curry, Kevin Durant, I shouldn't have put Seth Curry first. If it's Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Seth
in
Curry,
the proper hierarchy of the players,
and then like Joe Harris, you're going to be pretty bad on defense, but man, that will be so impossible to stop on offense. Like
and Patty
like
Mills
that,
as well, right? In that mix.
or Patty Mills or whatever, or like swapping a wing defender that doesn't need to play much offense and can sit in the dunker spot or something like that. All of a sudden looks pretty damn dangerous.
The one thing that Lucas touched on specifically was, what Ben Simmons is as a passer and a facilitator. So now everything you talk about, right? Getting downhill, rolling to the basket, and then also saying, hi, I also want to look out to all of these wing shooters.
That's what I mean about passing out of the short roll. Like the thing we were always waiting for Claxton to be able to do a lot better. And guys like this,
and now Dish, and now
the thing that looked like it was happening, like the tugboat turning around, like it was the thing that was just, and Claxton's great. I'm just saying, like, they needed him to do something he was not great at yet. Go ahead.
I did want to ask you this, because honestly, it could have been with Keith, it could have been with Saint, it could have been with Lucas. When you look over the roster now, and I think the first thing that you look at is saying, Cam Thomas, Day'Ron Sharpe, you guys can go ahead and just sit down and really absorb some great information here over the back end of the season. Is Kessler Edwards in that group too, or do you think that he still is the guy that you say, but you're still 3-and-D? So to your point, like, you can still just be the guy that can play defense for us. You can hit the perimeter shot. We know you can do some rebounding. You still have a function going forward, even if it's going to come down from the 30 to 35 minutes that he's been getting run.
Oh, he probably still starts. I think that you could start him still and feel pretty good about it. I think. I don't think like Simmons replaces that spot in the lineup. And I guess we're still all talking when like we're all when everyone's healthy, like when Kevin Durant and everyone, he's clearly still a starter now, but when everyone's healthy, because I still think you want his wing defense. I actually think that like the three of those guys between KD, Simmons, and Edwards becomes like a pretty switchable group. Like, they're not big and the strength is not amazing. Like against Giannis, it's going to look kind of bad at times, and guys like this or Embiid, but like perimeter switchability, like that's a pretty interesting dynamic group, I think, around most like late game combinations. And so, I think he has shown his defensive piece on that end is enough at this point to dream on him being able to still stick in the rotation. Totally with you. This is the end of Day'Ron Sharpe's time for this season, short of an injury. Probably a lot of the end of Cam Thomas's time. Maybe rightfully so, based on what we were sort of seeing from him at times. So, I think that, this hedges against Harris still being hurt for a long time, which is great. Like, if you get him back, all the better. I think you're just totally lousy with perimeter shooting at that point. Like, you have an overabundance of it, which has to be really scary. Like, if they actually get him back healthy and KD healthy, the East is looking around and saying this is going to be pretty damn hard to stop if you have 2 or 3 of these guys on the court at the same time. The defense will be really rough, but like 3 points for 2 points every time down the court is like is a calculation that can work pretty well for you.
Well, it's so funny too, because now you think about the full breadth of it. First of all, they go from having one veteran in Patty Mills and overtaxing him, as we talked about before, to being like, and we at least have 2, and then maybe 3 if Joe comes back. All of a sudden you go almost to a surplus. But even balancing the rotations, whatever, say it's 6 Seth Curry in the backcourt with Kyrie Irving. I don't care how you want to kind of create these things. And in the short term, it's still going to be Kessler Edwards there, and then Ben Simmons when he's in the mix, and Kevin Durant. Well, now, but the second unit can now get back into what we thought at the beginning, right? This Patty Mills and LaMarcus Aldridge, and then once fully healthy and engaged, and you want to bring Drummond in for some minutes, Kessler Edwards drops down to the second unit. Like, there's at least a much higher percentage chance that the Nets can be balanced on both ends of the floor as they work their rotations, as opposed to what it's looked like, not just with injuries, but even when fully healthy. It still had this version where you went, the second unit's just kind of a mess. You can create a lot more balance now when you bring in an extra shooter, because it affords you to be that much more potent still offensively in the first unit, and then maybe balance some defense into that second one, or vice versa.
Yeah, totally. Like they just add a little bit. They just add a little bit of depth, and that's like what you need. Like, everyone gets affected all the way down the chain here. I think is that what you're saying? That like yes, like everyone gets to slot back a little bit better into what you want their ideal role to be, and it just spreads out a little bit more balance here. And then, by the way, it tasks everyone's. It's like, I mean, we're not even talking about some of the guys further down the line here, like DeAndre Bembry. Whatever his role is going to look like going forward for this team, if it gets reduced or he's second unit, fine.
but you only want him to do what you brought him in to do. You're not now saying, boy, if only Bembry could shoot the three a little bit better, that would certainly be useful, right? Like, you don't have to ask him for that anymore, because you could have, at the minimum, Seth Curry and Patty Mills. Now you have 2 3-point shooters on the roster that you can balance out, whether it is with Kessler Edwards, whether it is with Bembry, even with Drummond, etc., even with LaMarcus Aldridge. You're going to keep being able to say, every time we put out a unit, there's perimeter threats, there's interior balance, there's mid-range shooting, and then, of course, there's Kevin Durant, and there's Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, totally. This is what we've been concerned with the whole time, going the other direction, where all these guys have been asked to do too much, right? Like, we've been seeing too many of these minutes from these guys, and it's been kind of a mess because they're just not guys that should be playing this much. And so, yeah, I'm in total agreement here. And it's funny, I'm just like was quickly doing the rounds, taking the temperature around sort of like the league, neutral parties, not Nets Twitter, which I think is feeling pretty good about this one, all things considered. Even independent minds around this that I know do not have a dog anywhere near the fight in terms of just wanting to, give their independent opinion. Haralabov Vulgaris is a good one who's pretty, used to work for the Dallas Mavericks and just, independent kind of dude. Even he was like, I love this for the Nets. And this is a guy that just is not, he's not a talking head. He doesn't even work for anybody. He's just like a really, really smart dude. And he's like yeah, he's just like, no, this is a good move. And then I saw a couple other things that are just saying, this is going to unlock things we've been saying the whole time. It's like, this is going to unlock pieces of Simmons's game that was not correct fits with Embiid in the past. This is where like their offense kind of butted heads, not on the personal level necessarily, but just like on a stylistic level. That just there was parts of their game that just didn't work perfectly together. I think Harden and Embiid will actually will work really, really well, and they're a formidable team. They're definitely. I think frankly, I still think they're better now than they were a few minutes ago. So I still think it's a fine trade for the Sixers here. It's just interesting.
Yeah, well, and you said about him, Harden opting into the next year. I think that's a part of it, right? Like, okay, we moved off a player that wasn't going to be here for us in Ben Simmons. We got back, obviously, James Harden. I wonder if internally how Philadelphia looks at it. Hey, we improved our chances this year, but this wasn't a sole, we need to capitalize on this year with Embiid playing MVP level. This is a little bit of a bigger picture. We've heard about Tobias Harris and what they want to try to accomplish there as well, right? So they may be looking at it as...
Sorry, real quick. Can I just read you a quick take here? Like before we get out of here, you'll love this. Sorry to interrupt you, but I just was got to scroll past here. Bobby Marks just went on. Did I already lose it? You know what? This always. Oh, here we go. Bobby Marks, in 3 years, we're going to be talking about James Harden like we're talking about Russell Westbrook and John Wall from a contract standpoint. That contract will be the worst contract in NBA history. That's ex-Nets guy, Bobby Marks. I don't think he's not like a hot take guy. He's simply just a nuts and bolts salary dude at this point. And I saw it because Haralabov Vulgaris agree with that too. But anyway, sorry to cut you off, but I wanted to throw that out there while we were talking about the Harden thing.
No, but again, this is what we said the other day when we were saying, which way do you think this is going to go? Just instinctually, whatever. But the secondary piece of it to me was like, man, I do not want to be sitting there. Even if imagine if the Nets had won a championship with Harden, it'd be even harder to sit there as Sean Marks and go, but man, I really don't want to have this money on the books in 2-3 years. Like, it'd be an almost impossible thing to do. The fan base would lose its minds. You're not bringing back the big three that won the chip for you. But I'd much rather this be a problem that I watch from afar than be sitting inside the office in Brooklyn going, so what do you think the deal is on 50+ million, 60 million? How is that going to treat us when we can't do anything to surround it as Kevin Durant gets a little bit older and whatever's going to happen with Kyrie Irving, obviously. So no, I agree 100%, man. And when you see someone like Bobby Marks, again, who's just sitting there talking just from a number standpoint, like this would be a big problem. And it makes me think, again, it's a 1.5-year window here that the Philadelphia 76ers want to get into. And by the way, they're trying to create a championship window for themselves. The Nets were trying to extend a championship window, and that's probably the two different narratives on either side of this. The other thing I was just going to touch on here as we wait to see if something finally comes through in the last 3 minutes. The countdown's it's like New Year's. We talked a lot about Ben Simmons' fit and what he opens up for other people, but specifically the dynamic that's going to be introduced between Kevin Durant and Ben Simmons. Like, I don't think maybe we haven't touched on it enough of just how valuable, when you think about what the Nets have had there, even LaMarcus Aldridge and Nicholas Claxton and Day'Ron Sharpe and Blake Griffin and James Johnson, none of these guys are sniffing the threshold of what Ben Simmons will open up for Kevin Durant when you talk about the two-man game working in towards the basket.
Well, if you look at just like even just take one even step back from that. One thing Ben Simmons hasn't had in his career up until this point is like someone to like I hate to say this about a grown adult, but who's, a lot more wealthy and talented at something than I am, but like to look up to and to like model yourself after professionally, because in terms of that, I think we can agree that there's almost no one better in the league than Durant. Maybe LeBron. Just in terms of professional, do your business, work hard. We're here to win. This is what it's about. I'll preach by example. Like we've seen this from Durant. Like Durant is A plus at this. He puts on a master class with this. He's like only wants to win, says all the right things because he believes it. And it's like easy to follow along, super patient. Obviously, look, we've seen, as he said, this guy has had multiple chances to throw Kyrie under the bus at this point. Like has not, has had every chance to have this sort of turn sour, hasn't said a bad word the entire time about Kyrie, but nothing but supportive, frankly, when it's only made his life harder. Like his life has only been harder because of it on the basketball court. And Simmons has never played with a guy like this. This is my last point that you can judge. Simmons has not played with a guy like this. He's played with Embiid, who's amazing, but they came in the league essentially at the same time, right? Like neither have won anything, and they play totally different styles of basketball. He played he played with Jimmy Butler, who Butler has like no time, who's also a fierce competitor and a total professional, but we've have many examples of him having no time for anybody that just doesn't have they're headed in the same way that he does. And he got himself out of Minnesota because it, and then took one look around Philly and was like, no, thanks. Now you want to say that's a knock on Simmons. I can hear that, but I just know that like Durant, at least from what we've seen, his personal touch is different than Butler's, I would say. And I think it's just a chance for Simmons to play with a totally different guy than he's ever played with before.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a really good point that you bring up, because Kevin Durant is not a guy that butts heads with his teammates. He's not a guy that forces his talent to say that I dictate the terms. And I think you always remember this narrative early on about LeBron of, he's not the iron-fisted leader of a team that demands the most. He makes the right basketball plays, but defers too much or whatever. And I was like, yeah, but everyone loves to play with him, and arguably young players can learn the best from that, as opposed to maybe just rubbing someone the wrong way, whether it's Jimmy Butler or any of these guys, James Harden, and just kind of going, all right, so you're disgusted with me? Well, it doesn't really inspire me to try to toe the line here. I only want to ask you, just as we see if anything comes in as the clock strikes midnight here. Brian Windhorst had said in the last couple of days that one of the mistakes of Kevin Durant's career here in the last couple of years was tying himself to Kyrie Irving. That would arguably be, like, for whatever reason he's made that choice, that is a failing. Now, we understand all the things that have happened with Kyrie, but it seems, I guess maybe that he's focusing on the personal side of it, but I found that odd, because it almost seems like you can debate whether or not it's the right player to want to pair yourself with, but again, on the court together, and I think he was even speaking to that, was the combination just from a basketball standpoint doesn't make all the sense in the world. And I just instinctually, my reaction was, I don't agree with that at all. Like, I think that Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant are a great combination of two players together, let alone from the personality side, where they don't seem to be terribly interested in butting heads around basketball, discussions.
My guess is he's referring more to the personality piece than the actual basketball. Sure. I mean, like, everyone agrees, if you've watched him for 10 seconds, that Kyrie's like one of the very best basketball players that's really ever played. It's really never been about that for him. It's been about the other stuff. But I'm sure in that situation, Windhorst is referring to the other stuff that comes along with Kyrie, like that has had him not playing for parts of the season. So I think everyone agrees that when Kyrie is playing and playing well, you definitely want him on your team. It's just, I think it's the other stuff, and it's hard to argue with stuff like that. I mean, with Horse, I think so. All right, I'll keep going.
Schroeder's going out of Boston here.
Yeah, I'll say one thing: sneaky good moves by the Boston Celtics today with Derek White. Adding Derek White to that backcourt, like to have a good defensive, like sort of like quasi. He's mostly a point guard, but he's like not exactly true archetype point guard. But that's a pretty good move by them. Celtics actually upgraded here a little bit. He's definitely an upgrade over Schroeder, so I'll tell you that. And they got Daniel Tice back too, so I'm not sure that's a huge move. But that was probably just to save a few bucks. But in general, the Celtics definitely improved a little bit here. Okay, we should. I think we're through the deadline here. I don't think there's anything else coming. It doesn't look like the Nets are going to make any other moves. I know they have, like I said, sometimes things can get in to the league office. Excuse me. And then they come in after 3, but I don't expect that we see anything else here after this. And if we do, I guess we could just jump on the podcast.
And we'll be, I'm going to be totally honest here. I don't know who the Brooklyn Nets are playing tonight, but there is a basketball game, and we'll be on for the post-game podcast, and we'll obviously highlight. And again, you'll probably maybe hear some things around buyout market guys. That could be the way that Sean Marks.
And I did know that well, it's funny because the reason I was going to say, I was like, wait, I know they're playing because it was going to be like, oh, they're going to play Dinwiddie again, but he just got traded, so they're not going to play Dinwiddie. By the way, I will say,
unicorn
in Washington, no Dinwiddie here. Washington just sold off like half of its players in the last 2 hours. Have to win this game. Like they just having Kyrie on the court, and the Nets did not send anyone off that really hadn't played last game. You know, you're staring down a starting lineup. I'm going to guess it's like something like Raul Neto. Kuzma's going to be there. I mean, they were starting Thomas Bryant. Like this is a game the Nets should win. All right, let's jump out of here.
You know that you can go ahead and follow us right here on YouTube. Obviously said subscribe. Doug wants to get over that 1,000 mark by the end of the weekend. That gives you a couple of days. We can do the math on that. Subscribe to the podcast. Listen to that wherever you get it need. As you know, we're doing it 5 days a week. We're breaking down all the post-game action as well. So we'll come in with anything else that happens. And I wanted to leave with a quote, but there just wasn't enough time, friends. Thanks to Keith McPherson, to Lucas Kaplan, to Saint from Nets Kingdom, excuse me. We're going to be having Lucas on again very soon to really break down how these pieces all fit together once the deadline is fully settled from the dust. And that's it, Doug, sir. I think we did this thing and we did it quite well.
All right. Talk to you guys later.